Pain is inevitable. Worrying is optional. A Buddhist story of emotional healing, you know. Sometimes life hits us like a storm. No warnings, no mercy. Just thunder, lightning, and rain pouring down on a day we hoped would be sunny. That's exactly how it felt for Ananda. He was just a quiet man, a school teacher in a small village nestled between green hills and winding rivers. Every morning, he'd walk to school holding a thermos of tea his wife had made for him, his fingers always curled tight around that old metal flask, like it was a part of his soul. To the children, he was more than a teacher. He was a gentle voice in a chaotic world, the kind of man who noticed when a child looked down, who stayed after school to listen to stories that no one else had time for. But one day, the classroom was empty, not because the students didn't come, but because he never made it there. Morning, Ananda's world cracked. His wife, Mira, his love of over 30 years, didn't wake up. There was no warning, no cries in the night, just the quiet breath of sleep that stopped somewhere between midnight and morning. And that was it. He called her name once, then again, then louder, then shaking her, then screaming, but she never stirred. That was the first arrow. And if you've ever lost someone, you'll know what I mean when I say that pain shoots straight through you, doesn't ask for permission, doesn't care how strong you are, doesn't wait until you're ready, it just breaks you. Ananda fell to the ground beside her, his cries echoing through the walls they had painted together, walls filled with laughter, stories, memories. Walls that suddenly felt cold and distant. The villagers came, quiet, soft steps. Words like, "I'm sorry, and she's in a better place now," floated around him, but they were just noises. Nothing could reach him in that moment. That's what pain does. It doesn't just hurt, it swallows you whole. In Buddhism, there's a teaching the Buddha gave that explains this so beautifully. He said, when an unwise man is struck by a painful feeling, it's as if he's shot with one arrow, and then, because of the way he reacts, fear, his anger, his grief, he shoots himself with a second arrow. Ananda had just been hit by the first arrow, the unavoidable reality of loss. But what followed was the second, and the second arrow. That was the real killer. It wasn't Mira's death that destroyed him. It was the stories he told himself afterward. He blamed himself. If only I had stayed awake longer. Maybe I missed something. Why didn't I notice she was feeling unwell? He replayed that morning 1,000 times, looking for a different ending. One where she opened her eyes, one where she smiled, one where he could whisper, "Don't leave me yet." But that ending never came. He stopped going to work. He stopped opening the curtains. He stopped drinking the tea she had once made him. The village watched as the man who once brought so much life to others slowly began to fade from his own. One day, a monk came to see him, a young monk maybe, in his early 30s, head shaved, robe simple. His name was Samantha. He sat outside Ananda's house, quietly, not knocking, not calling out, just waiting, like the wind waits for a leaf to fall. After what felt like hours, Ananda opened the door. His voice was hoarse. "What do you want?" The monk smiled gently. "Nothing. I just came to sit." Ananda stared. "Sit? Yes, if that's all right." Ananda didn't know why, but he nodded. The monk sat on the ground, no cushion, no chair, just sat. They didn't speak for a long time. Finally, Ananda asked, "You're here to talk to me about God?" "No," said the monk. "I'm here to talk to you about suffering." That was the beginning of something Ananda never expected, healing. But let's be honest, he didn't feel healed, not at all. In fact, when the monk spoke, part of him wanted to scream. Because when you're drowning, sometimes even kind words feel like stones. Samantha said something that haunted Ananda for days. Pain is inevitable, but worrying, that is a choice. Ananda wanted to yell, "Do you think I chose this pain? Do you think I chose to cry myself to sleep every night?" But the monk just sat, unmoved, patient. And something about that presence softened Ananda's heart, just enough to listen. Samantha told him the story of the 2 arrows again. He explained how our suffering isn't just the events of life, the first arrow. It's what we do afterward, the second one. It's the way we replay it in our mind, the way we build stories around it, the way we blame ourselves or others, the way we imagine the pain lasting forever. The second arrow is made by the mind, and the mind, oh, it's a powerful weapon. Ananda started walking again, not far, just a few steps outside his house. He watched how the trees moved with the wind, how the birds sang even after the rain, how the children still played on the dirt. rode in the evening light. The world hadn't stopped, it just paused for him, and he had to choose whether he would stay frozen or begin moving again. But he had. Questions we all ask when we're broken. Why did this happen? Why me? Where did she go? Will I ever feel whole again? The monk didn't pretend to have all the answers, but he offered something else, something rarer. He offered silence, and sometimes, in silence, we hear things we never could in noise. Weeks passed. Ananda began joining the monk during meditation. At first, he hated it, sitting still with that much pain inside. It's like locking yourself in a room with all your ghosts. But slowly, something shifted. He noticed that the pain was still there, but it didn't control him as much. It was like watching a storm from inside a sturdy house. You can still hear the thunder. You still see the flashes, but you're not being blown away anymore. He cried many times, not just for Mira, but for all the things he had never allowed himself to feel. The fears, the regrets, the memories. And each time he cried, the monk simply sat beside him. No judgment, no advice, just presence. Sometimes the most healing thing is not someone telling you it will be okay. Sometimes the most healing thing is someone saying, I see your pain, and I'm here. One day the monk told him something that changed everything. He said, Mira's body is gone, but the love you had that never dies, the love becomes something else, a memory, a lesson, a way of being, if you let it. Her love can become the path you walk on. Ananda wept. For the first time, his tears didn't feel like grief. They felt like gratitude. Pain is inevitable, but worrying, drowning in it, feeding it, clinging to it, that's a choice. It's not an easy choice, and it's not one we can always make right away. But eventually, if we stop shooting ourselves with that second arrow, we learn to stand again, we learn to live again, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. That was how Ananda's healing began, not through forgetting, but through remembering with gentleness, through sitting with his pain, not running from it, through choosing to walk, one trembling step at a time, toward a life that still held meaning. That as the sun rose again outside his small home, Ananda looked up and, for the first time in months, he whispered, thank you, not because the pain was gone, but because he had learned how to carry it. And in that quiet morning, he smiled. Have you ever been told, just get over it? People mean well. They really do. But pain doesn't work like that. It doesn't listen to the clock. It doesn't follow a schedule. It shows up in waves, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in tsunamis. Was learning this, though he had begun to rise from the deepest trenches of grief. The pain didn't vanish. It lingered like a shadow that returned every night. It hid in little things like the cup Mira used to drink from, the smell of her sorry still folded neatly in the wardrobe, the empty side of the bed. That was the second arrow, the subtle, invisible one, the one we shoot ourselves with when we think we should be better by now, the one that whispers, you're weak, the one that makes us ashamed for still missing someone, even years later. The monk Sumantha once told Ananda, you don't need to rush healing, you only need to stop hurting yourself more than life already has. One afternoon, Ananda and Sumantha were sitting beneath a large Bodhi tree outside the village monastery. The sun filtered gently through the leaves, and a warm breeze danced across their faces. A group of young novices played nearby, laughing as they tried to balance pebbles on top of each other, building tiny towers of stone. Ananda watched them, quietly, then asked, Venerable, how do you know if the pain is healing, or if you're just getting used to pretending? Samantha looked at him with deep, compassionate eyes, and replied, when you're pretending, you feel like you're holding your breath every day. When you're healing, you still cry, but your tears begin to wash something clean, not dirty. He continued, you see, pain visits everyone. No one escapes it, not even the enlightened one. But what makes the difference is how we respond. The Buddha didn't say, don't feel pain. He said, don't add more suffering to it. That day, Ananda asked to learn more about the second arrow, so the monk began to teach him there's something beautiful and brutally honest about the way the Buddha explained the mind. He said, an untaught person, when struck by a painful feeling, sorrows, grieves, laments, beats his breast, becomes distraught. So he feels two kinds of feelings, bodily and mental. The body feels the pain, but the mind creates a world out of it. Take a single event like the death of a loved one. The first arrow is the pain of losing them, but then the mind adds, I should have done more. I'll never be happy again. Why is the world so cruel? What if I'm next? That becomes the second arrow, and it keeps wounding us day after day, thought after thought. We can't stop the first arrow. Life shoots that without warning. But the second one, that's ours. Ananda began to see how many second arrows he had embedded deep inside him. He saw it when he turned away from the sound of laughter because he felt guilty for feeling joy. He saw it when he avoided the market because everyone there knew Mira, and he didn't want to face the questions in their eyes. He saw it when he'd catch himself smiling, only to stop suddenly, thinking, how dare I be happy? These were the second arrows, and they had left wounds no one else could see. One night, unable to sleep, Ananda walked to the monastery and sat silently on the cool stone floor. He waited there, staring at the moonlight on the pond, until Sri came and sat beside him. I'm tired, Ananda whispered, but not in my body. In my heart. Samantha nodded, then rested. Not with distraction, but with understanding. The next few weeks became a time of gentle unfolding. Samantha guided Ananda through the practice of mindfulness, not in some fancy way, but through simple, grounded actions. When you eat, just eat, he said. When you wash the cup, feel the water, listen to the sound. Notice the breath. It seemed small, but it was everything. Ananda learned to observe his thoughts like clouds passing through the sky. At first it was difficult. Thoughts would come like storms, memories of Mira, fear of loneliness, guilt for surviving. He'd chase after them without even realizing it. But slowly, he learned to pause, to say, that's it. Thought, it's not the truth, it's just the second arrow. And with every pause, the wound grew lighter. One morning, during meditation, something extraordinary happened. Ananda remembered a dream he had forgotten. A dream of Mira laughing as they danced barefoot in the rain outside their home. She wore a white shawl and her hair was soaked. She looked radiant, free, alive. When he opened his eyes, he was crying, but this time the tears were not made of longing. They were made of love. Samantha, seeing the tears, asked softly, "What do you see?" Ananda whispered, "I see her, and I'm not hurting. That is healing." The monk smiled, but healing is not a straight line. One day, a stranger came to the village. He was a traveler, tall, strong, with a confident smile. He asked for directions, shared stories, and soon captured everyone's attention with his laughter and charm. Ananda saw him talking to the villagers, playing with the children, even helping an old man carry water from the well, and something stirred inside Ananda, feeling he hadn't expected, envy. He hated himself for it. That night, he confessed to Samantha, "He's everything I used to be, and now, I'm just someone people pity." The monk didn't scold him, he simply said, "Another arrow." Ananda looked up, confused. Comparison is another arrow, one we shoot when we think our worth depends on what others see, not on what we are. That truth sank deep. The next morning, Ananda did something he hadn't done in months. He went to the school. The building was quiet, dusty, some chairs were broken, but the chalkboard still stood. His handwriting was still faintly visible in the corners. He sat at his old desk, and for a long moment, he just breathed. Then, he picked up a piece of chalk. He wrote one sentence on the board: "Pain is inevitable. Worrying is optional." When the children came back, because they always knew he would return, they saw those words, and they understood by now. Ananda had begun teaching again, not just reading and writing, but about life. He told the children stories of the Buddha of arrows, of pain, of letting go. He told them about Mira, about love, about how sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let yourself feel. And in teaching, he healed. Samantha would still visit him often. Sometimes they'd talk for hours. Sometimes they'd just sit in silence. But one evening, as they watched the sun dip below the trees, Samantha turned to him and said, "There is a kind of wisdom that only pain can teach." Ananda nodded. "And a kind of peace that only letting go can bring." That night, Ananda lit a small candle for Mira, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to honor the love that shaped him. He placed the candle by the window, whispered a silent prayer, and then turned to go inside. But just before he closed the door, he looked up at the stars and smiled. "Thank you," he whispered. Again, that this time, it wasn't just for her, it was for the pain, for the healing, and for the lesson of the second arrow. By now, Ananda had come to understand something most people never stop to think about. Pain doesn't need a reason. It doesn't always come with a warning, and it doesn't always leave when you beg it to. but it can, if you let it, become your teacher. And like any good teacher, pain doesn't just give you answers, it gives you questions. It was the rainy season now. The village paths were slick with mud, and the air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and blooming wildflowers. Everything slowed down during this time. Markets closed early, people stayed indoors, and there was a kind of silence in the evenings, deep and humming, like the pause between heartbeats. Ananda spent his evenings under the same Bodhi tree where he had first sat with Su. The tree had become like an old friend, silent, patient, wise. One evening, after a heavy rain, the monk arrived with an old scroll tucked beneath his robe. He handed it to Ananda and said, "Do you know about the 8 worldly winds?" Ananda shook his head. "No." The monk smiled. "Then tonight, let's meet them." He unrolled the scroll. The paper was stained with age. The ink faded, but still strong. At the top, in careful calligraphy, were 8 words: gain, loss, praise, blame, fame, disgrace, pleasure, pain. These, Sumantha said, are the 8 winds that blow through every human life. Ananda leaned closer, intrigued. The monk continued, "The Buddha taught that these winds constantly move through the world. You can't control them, you can't escape them. All you can do is not let them carry you away." He pointed to the first 2, gain and loss. Every joy you feel from gaining something, he said, will one day turn into the sorrow of losing it. Ananda nodded slowly. "Like Mira." "Yes," Sumantha said gently, "but also like your strength, your youth, your home, even your memories." Eventually, Ananda's eyes moistened. "But isn't that cruel?" The monk shook his head. "It's not cruel, it's nature. We suffer not because things change, but because we expect them not to." Then came the next 2, praise and blame. Sumantha smiled. "You remember the traveler who came to the village, the one you envied?" Ananda laughed. "Yes, he was praised for being charming, for being kind. But do you remember what happened when he left without saying goodbye? People turned against him." "Exactly. One day you're admired, the next, you're misunderstood. If you chase praise, you'll live in fear of blame. But if you live by your values, praise and blame are just echoes in the wind." Ananda felt that truth settle into his bones. So much of his life had been spent chasing approval, first from his parents, then his teachers, then his students, even Mira. Now he understood why it had left him so tired. "The next 2, fame and disgrace. Even in our small village," said Sumantha, "there's gossip. Stories spread. One day you're honored, the next, your name is dirt on someone's tongue." Ananda remembered when he had first stopped teaching after Mira's death. Some villagers had whispered, "He's weak." Others had said, "He's abandoned the children." He had taken those words into his heart like poison. But over time, as he returned to teaching, those same voices had changed. Now they called him wise, brave, compassionate. But he no longer believed the praise or the blame, because neither was the truth. Only his intention was real. And finally, the last pair, pleasure and pain. Sumantha's voice softened. "These are the winds that touch every living being. Not one creature escapes them, not the ants, not the birds, not the gods." Ananda asked, "Then what do we do? If we can't stop these winds from blowing?" Smiled. "You build a tree inside yourself, one with deep roots. So when the winds come, because they will, you sway, but you do not fall." That night, Ananda sat awake. Long after the monk had gone, he stared at the candlelight flickering on his wall and repeated those 8 words over and over: gain, loss, praise, blame, fame, disgrace, pleasure, pain. He began to see how his entire life had been dancing with these winds. The joy of marrying Miragain, the sorrow of her passing lot, the warmth of being loved by the sting of gossip when he withdrew blame, the admiration of his wisdom fame, the shame he had once felt for grieving disgrace, the comfort of her touch pleasure, the aching of her absence pain. They had all been there always. He had just never named them. Now he could see them, feel them, even bow to them, but he no longer let them define him. One morning, as the village slowly returned to life after the rains, Ananda gathered his students and began a new lesson. He didn't open a textbook. He didn't talk about numbers or letters. He picked up a handful of dried leaves, crumpled some in his palm, and let them fall to the ground. "This," he said, "is life." The children stared, confused. He smiled. "Sometimes you will be praised, sometimes blamed, sometimes you'll gain everything, sometimes you'll lose everything. The winds will never stop blowing." He paused. But if you learn to bend, not break, you will become unshakable. A little girl raised her hand, like a tree. Ananda beamed. Exactly, like a tree. In the weeks that followed, Ananda began a small project. With the help of the children, he planted a Bodhi tree near the school. They called it the Tree of the Eight Winds. Every child carved one word into a smooth stone and placed it at the base of the tree. Gain, loss, praise, blame, fame, disgrace, pleasure, pain. Each time the winds blew and they always did, the tree would sway, its leaves rustling like whispered reminders. This too will pass. Stay grounded. Let go. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Ananda returned to the tree alone. He sat down beside it and closed his eyes. He thought of Myra not with sorrow, but with tenderness. He thought of all the winds that had once nearly torn him apart, and he thought of the monk who had taught him to breathe again, with a heart full of peace. Ananda whispered to the wind, "I am no longer afraid of you." And the wind, carrying 1,000 memories, blew gently through his hair like a blessing. There are 3 kinds of strength in this world. The first is the strength of the body muscles, endurance, the ability to lift, to carry, to move. The second is the strength of the mind, logic, intelligence, memory, clarity. But the third is the quietest and most easily missed. It's the strength of the heart, the strength to keep loving after loss, the strength to be kind when the world is unkind, the strength to sit in silence with sorrow and still choose compassion over bitterness. Ananda didn't know he had that third kind of strength until the day the storm came back. It began with a letter, folded carefully, sealed with wax, left at the foot of the Tree of the Eight Winds. Ananda found it early one morning while sweeping dry leaves from around the tree's roots. There was no name on the envelope, only one line, written in rushed, trembling handwriting. "Please help me before I disappear." He opened it slowly, his hands already sensing the heaviness inside. The letter read, "Dear teacher, I don't know if you remember me. I was your student a long time ago. My name is Liana. I wasn't a good student. I talked too much. I forgot my lessons, but you always smiled at me anyway. You once told me I had a brave heart. I didn't believe you then. Now I live in the city. I'm lost. I cry every day. I don't sleep. I don't eat. I feel like a ghost. My family says I should just move on, but I can't. Something inside me is broken, and I don't know how to fix it. I remembered your stories about the Buddha, about pain, about letting go, and I wondered, can those stories save someone like me? I'm writing this because I'm afraid. I'm afraid I won't make it to next week. If you can still see the brave heart in me, please write back." Ananda stood there for a long time, the letter pressed to his chest. Then he closed his eyes and whispered, "Oh child, you have no idea how brave your heart still is." That evening, Ananda walked to the monastery with the letter in hand. Sumantha listened as Ananda read it aloud, his voice trembling. Then the monk said something that made Ananda pause. "You know why she wrote to you? Because she remembered my stories." "No," Sumantha said, "because she saw your strength. Not the strength of someone who's never fallen, but someone who fell and got back up. She saw the third kind of strength." Ananda lowered his head. "But what if I say the wrong thing? What if I can't help her?" Sumantha smiled gently. "Then you sit beside her pain, the same way I sat beside yours." That night, under the flickering glow of an oil lamp, Ananda wrote back, "Dear Liana, I remember you. I remember how you used to sneak sweets to your friends during class, how you laughed with your whole face, how you once told me you wanted to grow up and build houses for birds. I remember your brave heart, and I still see it. I can't fix what's hurting you, but I can tell you something true. Pain is not a punishment, and feeling broken does not mean you are beyond repair. The Buddha once said, just as a candle cannot burn without fire, men cannot live without a spiritual life." I think what he meant was, we all need something deeper than the surface. We need a reason, a path, a way to sit with the fire without letting it destroy us. Come home, Liana, not just to the village but to yourself. I will wait for you under the tree. Liana returned a week later, thin, pale eyes hollow like someone who had forgotten how to dream, but she was alive. That was her victory. Ananda welcomed her, not with words but with warm rice porridge, fresh from his own stove. He sat with her in silence, just as Sumantha had once sat with him, and in that silence, something gentle began to grow between them, a space where pain could speak and still be heard. Over the next few days, Ananda and Liana walked the village paths together. Sometimes she talked, sometimes she cried, sometimes she just stared into the trees, her mind far away. He never rushed her, and one morning she finally asked, "Will this feeling ever go away?" Ananda paused. "No," he said honestly, "not completely." She looked down, but, he continued, "It will stop controlling you. The pain will become softer, and then one day, you'll realize it taught you something no one else could have." What? How to see others, how to love deeper, how to walk through fire without becoming ash. Liana didn't say anything, but the next morning, she woke early and swept the path around the Bodhi tree. She stayed in the village for many weeks. Some days were bright, filled with laughter, with small projects, with shared meals and quiet joy. Other days were storms when the winds returned, and the sky inside her turned gray again. But no matter what the day brought, Ananda reminded her, the winds don't stop, but neither does the tree. And slowly, that truth began to root itself in her bones. One afternoon, Sumantha joined them under the tree. He listened as Liana shared her pain. When she finished, he asked, "Do you know why people suffer more than necessary?" She shook her head, "Because they believe they are alone in their suffering." Then he told her a story. Once a woman came to the Buddha, carrying her dead child in her arms. She was hysterical with grief. She begged the Buddha to bring her son back to life. The Buddha said he would help, but only if she could bring him a mustard seed from a home that had never known death. The woman went from house to house, but in every home, someone had died: a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, a child. She returned to the Buddha with empty hands, and in her emptiness, she found peace. Because she finally understood grief is universal. It connects us, even when it feels like it's tearing us apart. Liana listened quietly, and then she whispered, "So I'm not broken, just human." Sumantha smiled. Exactly. One evening, as the village prepared for the annual lantern festival, Liana helped Ananda and the children hang paper lanterns from the trees. Each lantern carried a message, small handwritten notes from the villagers, filled with prayers, hopes, and memories. Liana wrote one, too. She didn't show it to anyone, but as she tied it to a branch, Ananda caught a glimpse of her words, "I am still here, and that is enough." That night, as the sky filled with flickering lights, Ananda stood beside her and said softly, "You know, you've taught me something." She turned to him, surprised. "Me?" "Yes, that even a heart shattered by sorrow can still glow." Liana smiled, truly smiled for the first time in months, and for a brief, golden moment, everything was still. Pain is strange. It doesn't just live in the heart, it lives in the body, in the way your shoulders tense when someone says your name the wrong way, in the way you pause before answering a question, fearing the answer will break something inside you. In the way you hold your breath at night, just in case silence feels safer than tears. Ananda had carried his pain in silence for a long time, so had Liana, but neither of them truly realized just how much they still carried, until the day the stranger arrived. He came into the village just as the last of the lantern festival decorations were being taken down. He was tall, with a tired face and sharp eyes that seemed to see too much. His name was Dev. He had no bags, no offerings, no greetings, just a thin cloak and a worn walking stick. When asked where he had come from, he said only, "Far enough to forget, but not far enough to escape." That made the elders suspicious, but Ananda saw something else. He saw the same thing he'd once seen in his own mirror. Lost. Dev stayed in an empty hut at the edge of the village. He spoke little, he kept to himself. He avoided the children, but at night, when the village slept, he would sit near the tree of the 8 winds, just staring up at the leaves. One night, Ananda approached him with 2 cups of warm ginger tea. Dev didn't speak. He just took the tea and held it in both hands like it was the first warmth he'd known in months. "I used to sit here," Ananda said softly, "every night, for a long time." Dev looked at him. His voice, when it came, was brittle. "What changed?" Ananda smiled. "I stopped asking why, and started asking how." They sat in silence for a long time. Eventually, Dev whispered, "My wife died in a fire." Ananda closed his eyes. "I tried to save her," Dev said. "I got there too late. I still see her hands against the window. I still hear her voice. The second arrow. The self blame. The loop." Ananda didn't interrupt. He just listened, and Dev kept talking. "I ran, left my home, my work, Everything, I thought. Maybe if I walked far enough, the flames would stop chasing me. Ananda looked gently at him. But they followed you. Dev nodded. They're inside me now. Over the next few weeks, something strange began to happen. Dev kept returning to the tree. Sometimes Ananda would find him just sitting there, breathing with his eyes closed. Other times, he'd leave small things behind: stone, a feather, a folded scrap of cloth. One morning, Liana found him writing something in the dirt with a stick. "What are you doing?" she asked. Dev didn't look up, trying to remember the shape of silence. Liana, curious, started sitting with him. During the evenings, they didn't talk much at first, but pain has a way of recognizing itself in others, and slowly, they began to share. Liana told him about the nights she had sat on her apartment floor, surrounded by unopened letters and silent phones. Dev told her about the moment he knew she was gone, the moment his body ran. But his soul stayed behind, and through their brokenness, something unspoken passed between them. "I see you. I survived, too." One evening, as the sun melted into the hills, Ananda gathered the villagers under the Bodhi tree. He held a small bowl filled with river stones. "Today," he said, "we are going to do something different. We are going to name the things we carry." He passed the bowl around. Each person picked a stone, held it, and then spoke. One by one, voices rose like a soft chant of truth: regret, fear, anger at my father, shame, the sound of my brother's last breath, my son's silence, my own voice, the one I lost years ago. And then they placed the stones gently at the tree's roots, like laying down armor. Like saying, "This hurt me, but I am still standing." Dev stepped forward last. He held his stone tightly. "I carried guilt," he said, "and blame. I thought I was too late. I thought I should have died with her." He paused. "But now, I carry her memory, not her death, just her life." He knelt and placed the stone on the ground. Liana stood beside him, her hand gently brushing his, and Ananda, standing beneath the rustling leaves, felt something powerful shift in the air, not because someone had let go, but because someone had let themselves be seen. That night, Liana asked Ananda, "Why does it help to speak it out loud?" He replied, "Because pain kept secret becomes shame, and shame grows in silence. But when we speak our pain, it becomes a bridge, and bridges connect us." She nodded, tears brimming. "I never thought I'd care about anyone again," she whispered. "And now, I want Dev to be okay." Ananda smiled. "That's healing." In the days that followed, Dev began to change. He joined the villagers in their daily tasks. He helped rebuild a fence, shared a meal with a widow, even laughed with the children once. It wasn't a loud transformation, it was quiet, like moss growing over a scar. One morning, Ananda found him tending to the tree of the 8 winds. He was brushing dust from the engraved stones. "I used to think I'd always carry pain," Dev said. Ananda placed a hand on his shoulder. "You will, but it won't always carry you." That evening, Ananda added a 9th stone to the base of the tree. He didn't write a word on it, he just left it blank. When Liana asked why, he said, "Because sometimes what we carry has no name, but it still deserves a place to rest." And that was the night they all learned, healing isn't about forgetting, it's about remembering, with gentleness. Most people think stillness is silence, but that's not quite true. Stillness has a sound. It's the sound of a sigh, released after years of holding your breath. It's the rustling of trees when no one is watching. It's the quiet click of a door, finally closing on a chapter you thought would never end. Stillness isn't the absence of life, it's the return to it. Ananda had only recently begun to hear this sound in himself again, in the wind, in the laughter of the children, in the way Liana's eyes no longer looked like a storm waiting to break. And one day, when the village was especially quiet, Ananda asked Sumantha a question he had been holding for years. "Why do we wait so long to make peace with our pain?" The old monk smiled and said, "Because noise makes us feel alive, but it's stillness that teaches us how to live." The truth is, many people are afraid of stillness. They say they want peace, but the moment silence wraps around them, they turn to their phones, their distractions, their noise. Why? Because silence has a way of revealing everything. We've been trying to avoid our fears, our guilt, our unfinished grief, and that's exactly what happened when Liana decided to spend a day alone. It had been almost 2 months since her return to the village. She was stronger now. She smiled more. She even began helping Ananda with his lessons. guiding the younger children with patience and warmth. But one morning, she came to Ananda and said, "I think I need to be by myself for a while." He didn't ask why. He just handed her a small packet of rice, a blanket, and a quiet nod. Liana walked to the edge of the village, toward the hills where the monks sometimes meditated in solitude. There was a small cave there, barely big enough for 2 people, shaded by wild vines and a single frangipani tree. She sat there for a long time. At first, she listened to the birds, the wind, the rustling leaves. But then, when the world quieted, the noise inside her began to rise. She heard the voices again. "You're weak. You ruined everything. You'll never be whole." She felt the ache in her chest return. That heavy weight, the tightness in her throat, the helplessness. She wanted to scream, but instead she whispered the same question Ananda once asked. "Is this the second arrow?" And somehow, that question broke the spell. Liana breathed deeply. She placed her hand on her chest. She said softly, "This is pain, not punishment." Again, slower, "This is pain, not punishment." The tears came not in a wave this time, but like a soft rain, gentle and cleansing. She sat with her grief, not pushing it away, not trying to fix it, just being with it. And in that stillness, she finally heard the sound of healing. It was not loud, it was not dramatic, it was a breath she had forgotten how to take. Back in the village, Dev was also learning the sound of stillness in his own way. One afternoon, Ananda invited him to join the children in a walking meditation. They walked slowly, barefoot on the earth. Each step matched with a breath. Inhale, step, exhale, step. At first, Dev was restless. His thoughts raced, his feet felt clumsy. He wanted to walk faster, to get somewhere, to do something. But then he noticed something. A small boy beside him, no older than 6, was smiling as he walked. Not because he was going anywhere, but because he wasn't going anywhere. He was just there, step by step, breath by breath. Dev slowed down. And in that moment, the world did too. Later that evening, Dev said to Ananda, "Why didn't anyone teach us this when we were children?" Ananda laughed gently. "Because the world taught us to run, and only suffering teaches us to stop." Dev nodded. "And once we stop, then we begin again. But slower, kinder, wiser." In the days that followed, more villagers began to ask Ananda about stillness. A widow who couldn't sleep, a father who couldn't stop worrying about his son's future, a young man grieving a love that had left too soon. They didn't need loud answers, they needed space. So Ananda created one. He cleared a small grove by the river, laid stones in a circle, and called it the Circle of Silence. People came, sat, listened, not to each other but to themselves. And somehow, in that shared stillness, something beautiful unfolded. The fear of being alone disappeared. Liana returned from her cave 2 days later. Her eyes were puffy, but peaceful. She didn't say much. She just hugged Ananda tightly and whispered, "Thank you for not rescuing me." He smiled. Some journeys can only be walked alone. That evening, under the Bodhi tree, the 3 of them, Ananda, Liana, and Dev, sat together without words. The tree rustled above them. The wind moved gently, and from deep within the silence, there was no sadness, only presence, only peace, only the sacred sound of stillness. Suffering has many shapes. Sometimes it comes as death, sometimes it arrives as betrayal, and sometimes it disguises itself as success, beautiful on the outside, but empty within. It was early spring when the letter came. It bore the seal of a man the villagers hadn't spoken of in years. Kiran, Ananda's childhood friend, the boy who once dreamed of building schools, who laughed louder than the thunder, who vowed to change the world. Kiran had left the village long ago to chase ambition in the city, and now his words returned like a shadow at the door. "Ananda, I know I said I'd never come back, but I am not the man I once was. I have climbed the mountain of my dreams, wealth, fame, influence, and I have found it is hollow. I am drowning in gold and starving for peace. I thought I could escape pain by winning, but now I see I only changed its shape. If there is anything left in me worth saving, I need to find it at the place where I lost it. I am coming home." Kiran Ananda folded the letter and closed his eyes. He whispered, "The lotus blooms in fire too." When Kiran arrived, the village did not recognize him. His skin was polished with city oil. His shoes were too clean. His eyes were restless. But the moment he stepped under the shade of the Bodhi tree, all pretense crumbled. He knelt before Ananda and whispered, "Help me remember who I am." Ananda lifted him by the shoulders. "You're already remembering," he said. And from that moment, Kiran became a student, again not of letters, but of living. The first thing Kiran struggled with was slowness. "I'm used to calendars, schedules, alarms here. There's no rush. It terrifies me." Ananda smiled. "That's because you mistook motion for meaning." He gave Kiran a simple task, to sit with the children and teach them how to weave baskets. "I don't know how," Kiran protested. "Then learn, and let them teach you." At first, Kiran fumbled. His fingers weren't used to gentle movements. They were used to contracts and devices, but the children laughed with him, corrected him, encouraged him, and slowly, as the reeds folded between his palms, something began to uncoil in his chest. He wasn't building empires, he was building baskets, and it was enough. One evening, Kiran sat with Dev by the riverbank. They didn't speak for a long time. Then Kiran said, "I spent half my life chasing applause. Now, the silence scares me." Dev nodded. "Silence scared me too, until I realized it wasn't silence. It was the echo of everything I hadn't faced." Kiran asked, "And what did you find when you faced it?" Dev looked up at the stars. "Myself." And she was still there beneath all the fear. Meanwhile, Liana had started drawing again. As a child, she used to sketch the faces of animals and people with surprising accuracy. But after her breakdown, she hadn't touched a pencil in years. One afternoon, while helping repaint the old school walls, a little boy handed her a piece of charcoal and said, "Draw me a bird." So she did, and something stirred Dot from that day on. She drew every morning, at first in private, then on the school walls, then in the village square. Each drawing was a piece of her story: a wing, a tear, a sunrise, a scar. The villagers began calling her the girl who paints feelings, and she began to believe again that feelings were not curses but colors. One day, Ananda gathered Dev, Liana, and Kiran for tea. He placed 4 cups before them, each one different, one cracked, one chipped, one flawless, one handmade and lopsided. He poured tea into each dot, then asked, "Which cup is the most worthy?" They looked at each other. Dev said, "The flawless one holds tea best." Liana said, "But the handmade one feels more alive." Kiran said, "The cracked one has survived more." Ananda smiled, and yet, he said, "Each one holds the same tea." He paused. "Suffering makes us believe our cup defines our worth. But the Buddha taught the vessel may change, but the truth it holds does not." Later that night, Ananda sat alone under the stars. He thought of Meera. He thought of the students who never returned. He thought of the boy he used to be, the one who cried under this very tree, begging life to be kinder. And then he smiled, because he realized something. Life had not become easier. He had become softer, and softer is stronger. That spring, the village changed, not because it grew richer, not because it became famous, but because more people started listening to their pain. More people learned to sit still. More people learned how to let go, not to forget but to honor. One morning, Kiran walked to the tree alone and laid something at its roots. It was a gold pen, polished, expensive, heavy. Dot. When Ananda saw it later, he smiled. Kiran had once used that pen to sign deals, worth millions. Now, it rested beside a child's stone engraved with the word fear, and in that quiet offering, the richest man in the city had become the freest man in the village. Later, Ananda carved something into the base of the Bodhi tree. Even in fire, the lotus blooms, and that became the lesson of the season when healing no longer whispered, but sang. The mind has many doors. Some open with joy, some creak under the weight of memory, and some remained locked for years, until grief finds the key. It was now midsummer in the village. The sun rose early, and the wind carried the scent of ripe jackfruit, bamboo shoots, and childhood. Birds called out in the morning. Children laughed by the riverbank. The tree of the 8 winds had grown fuller, its roots deeper, its shade wider, and under it, the circle of healing grew to. One by one, people came not for solutions, but for space. For breath, for stillness. But not all visitors came with open hands. Some came with closed fists. Her name was Priya. She walked into the village like a shadow, quick-tongued and cloaked in silence. She carried no bags, no books, only a satchel with a faded scarf tucked inside. The villagers whispered, "She's the daughter of Kiran's old rival." One said, "She was cast out of her family." Another, whispered she used to be a lawyer. Someone added, a good one, until she vanished after her mother's death. They weren't wrong, but what they didn't say was this: Priya had come to bury something, or perhaps to be buried by it. She didn't speak to anyone at first, not even Ananda, but she came to the tree every morning, sat for exactly 12 minutes, then left. Dev noticed first. She's waiting for something, he said. Ananda nodded. Or she's waiting to stop waiting. It wasn't until the 12th day that she spoke to Liana. Liana was repainting the side wall of the school with a mural A Rising Sun behind two hands, releasing a bird. Priya stood behind her, watching. You forgot the shadows, she said. Liana turned, surprised. Excuse me. The hands, Priya said. They need shadows, otherwise the bird looks too free, unbelievably free. There was a silence. Then Liana smiled gently. Maybe that's the point. Priya didn't smile back, but the next day, she returned with a brush and painted the shadows. Little by little, Priya opened, not like a flower, more like a locked door that creaked, protested, resisted, and one hinge gave in. She told Liana her story. Her mother had died 2 years ago, a slow death, one filled with apologies, regrets, and too many unspoken words. They had argued days before. Her mother had begged for peace, and Priya had left the room. I told her I'd come back when she stopped crying. She never did. Priya did come back, but only to find her gone, and the scarf, the same one now folded in her satchel, was left on the bed like a whisper. I couldn't cry at her funeral, she said, so I started crying everywhere else. When she finally spoke to Ananda, it was not to ask for advice, it was to accuse. You talk about peace, she said, but how do you forgive someone who left you? How do you forgive yourself for being too late? Ananda was quiet. Then he said, forgiveness is not saying it's okay, it's saying, I am ready to stop hurting myself with this memory. Priya stared at him. So I should just forget it? No, he replied gently. You remember, but you remember differently. He led her to the river that afternoon. They stood in silence. Then he handed her a leaf. Place your sorrow here, he said, and let the water carry it. Priya didn't move. I don't know how to do that, she whispered. Ananda knelt beside the river, touched the water with his fingertips. You don't have to mean it, you just have to begin. She hesitated, then slowly, tenderly she placed the scarf on the leaf, and the river took it. She didn't cry, not yet, but her hands unclenched. Meanwhile, Kiran had begun building a small wooden bridge near the village entrance, a gift for travelers who might come as he once did, tired, restless, lost. Dev helped him. Liana painted carvings into the wood. Waves, leaves, flames, birds. Even the children pitched in, gathering stones, holding beams, offering songs. The whole village watched as the bridge took shape. But on the final day, as the last plank was being nailed, Priya stepped forward. I want to name it. They all turned to her. She said softly, let's call it the Bridge of Letting Go. No one objected. They simply nodded, because they all understood. That evening, as the bridge stood finished, Ananda gathered everyone under the Bodhi tree. Each of us, he said, carries something we once couldn't release. He looked around at Liana, at Dev, at Kiran, at Priya. At first, we protect our pain like treasure. We tell ourselves it defines us. But the Buddha taught that clinging is the root of suffering, not pain itself. He took a small clay bowl, filled with water. This, he said, is our mind. Then he dropped a pebble in. The water rippled. This is pain. The ripple spread. But now, he said, watch what happens when we cling to it. He dropped another pebble, then another, and another. Soon, the bowl overflowed. Pain alone does not break us, he said. It is the refusal to let go. That night, under the stars, one by one, the villagers crossed the new bridge. Each held a stone, and at the middle of the bridge, they stopped, whispered something only they could hear, then let the stone fall into the river below. Thud, splash, breath. By morning, the riverbed was filled with tiny echoes of release, and above it, the bridge of letting go stood strong. Silent. Sacred. Priya left the village a few days later. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't need to, but she left a note under the tree. I once thought strength was holding everything together. Now I know true strength is knowing what to finally set down. Thank you for the silence, for the shadows, for the river. Ananda folded the note, placed it in his book of lessons, and smiled. Because some chapters don't end with closure, they end with freedom. Grief moves in circles. You think you've left it behind, but one smell, one word, one familiar song, and suddenly you're back in the beginning. It was the morning of the full moon when the boy arrived. No one knew where he came from. He looked no older than 10, barefoot and covered in dust, carrying nothing but a wooden flute and a string around his wrist with 7 colored beads. He didn't speak for hours, not a word. He just sat near the Bodhi tree, wide-eyed, watching everyone. Ananda offered him food. The boy stared at it, then gently pushed it back, not out of pride, but as if he was unsure he deserved it. Liana approached him next. She crouched down, handed him a fresh mango, peeled and sweet. "Here," she whispered. "You don't have to earn this. It's just mango." The boy took it with both hands. Then something extraordinary happened. He smiled, just for a moment, but in that smile was something ancient, something wounded, something holy. They called him Tanu, and over the next few days, he slowly folded into the rhythm of the village. He followed the children when they played, never speaking but always watching. He helped sweep the leaves around the temple, even though no one asked him to. He sat quietly in the corner of talks, his flute in his lap like a sleeping bird, but still, no words, until the day of the fire. It was a simple kitchen fire, a gust of wind, a careless ember, and suddenly the storage hut was ablaze. Smoke rose like a scream into the sky. Villagers rushed with buckets. Sandcloth. Panic spread, and Tanu froze. He dropped to the ground. His body shook violently, his eyes wide, locked. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Ananda saw him, rushed to his side. Kiran knelt beside him. Tanu, it's okay. You're safe." But the boy was trapped inside a storm. Until one small word broke through. "Appa." Father. That night, after the fire had been put out and the village had returned to quiet, Ananda sat beside Tanu near the river. The boy clutched his flute like it was the only thing tethering him to the earth. "I saw him burn," he said. His first real sentence. Ananda didn't reply. "I tried to wake him. I screamed. He didn't move." A pause. The house was made of wood. Like this flute. He held it up. "My father made it. Told me to play it when I was afraid. But after the fire, I couldn't." He placed the flute on the ground beside him. "Now it just feels like a lie." Ananda picked it up gently. "May I?" he asked. Tanu nodded. Ananda raised it to his lips, blew softly at first. Only air came out, then a trembling note. Fragile, imperfect, but real. He played a short melody, just 3 notes, then handed it back. Tanu stared at him. "How did you do that?" Ananda smiled. "I didn't try to make it perfect. I just let it breathe." The next morning, Tanu played the flute again. The village stopped to listen. It wasn't music, not yet, but it was the sound of a boy trying, and that was enough. As the days passed, the boy spoke more. He told them how he and his father had lived, alone in a small hut by the forest. How one night, lightning struck. The house caught fire. He escaped. His father didn't know. One in the nearby village knew him, so he walked for days, until he found the tree. "Something told me to stop here," he said. "I think it was him." Liana cried when she heard this. She remembered her own night of walking. Dev placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I ran, too," he said, "but I didn't stop soon enough." Tanu looked at him. "Is this the place we stop?" Dev thought for a moment, then said, "No, this is the place we learn that we can." Ananda gathered everyone that evening. He told the story of the Buddha's return to his father's palace after his awakening, how the people he left behind thought he had abandoned them. Ananda said, but when they saw the light in his face, the calm, they understood. He hadn't left to escape them. He left to understand suffering so he could return and help them carry theirs. He looked around. At some point, he said, "All of us ran. From pain, from guilt, from truth. But there comes a time when the running must stop, not because we're healed, but because we're ready to heal together." That night, Tanu placed his flute under the Bodhi tree. He tied the string of beads to one of its branches, then whispered, "You can rest now, Appa." And the wind answered with a hush. The village entered a new season, not just of weather, but of truth. They stopped hiding their scars. They spoke more honestly. They held each other longer. And each morning, the sound of Tanu's flute grew stronger. It still wavered, still cracked, but it carried a tune now, a melody of memory, and love, and letting go. One day, Ananda found Liana staring at the mountains. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She smiled. That we are all like rivers. We think we're alone, but eventually, we return to the ocean. Ananda placed a hand on her shoulder. And what do we call that ocean? She looked at him, eyes shimmering. Compassion. Later, that evening, Ananda wrote in his notebook, "There is no final healing, only deeper understanding. And from that understanding comes the courage to stop running and to begin again." And that became the lesson of the moonlit night. The night a boy stopped running. The night a village began singing. The night silence finally had a sound. The rain came softly that morning, not as a storm, but as a blessing. The kind of rain that doesn't soak, but heals. The kind that feels like someone placing their hand gently on your back and saying, "It's okay now." The Bodhi tree glistened. The river murmured. And the village, now awake in heart more than ever before, began to hum with quiet joy. It had been a year since Ananda started the circle of stillness, and everything had changed yet. Nothing had changed at all. The same children laughed, the same winds blew, the same pain existed, but now it had a place to sit, a place to breathe, a place to be held, not hidden. That morning, Ananda stood beneath the Bodhi tree with a parchment in his hand. The villagers gathered. Dev, Kirintanu, the children, the elders, even travelers from nearby towns who had heard of the village where people heal. Ananda raised the parchment and said, "Today, I share what we've learned, not as final truths, but as seeds, for each of you to carry, to plant, to protect." He unfolded the parchment and read aloud. The teachings of this place. 1. Pain is not a punishment. It is a part of being human. You are not broken because you hurt because you are alive. Honor that. 2. The second arrow is always in your hands. The first wound may not be your fault, but how long you bleed, that is your choice. Point 3. Stillness is not the absence of pain. It is the presence of peace. Don't wait for life to be quiet to find calm. Bring calm to the noise. 4. You do not have to walk fast, only forward. Progress is not speed, it is softness. It is breathing through the next step. Point 5. Letting go is not forgetting, it is remembering without collapsing. It is honoring without clinging. 6. Everyone carries something. Be kind, always. Every person you meet is holding something invisible. 7. You don't have to be ready to begin, you only have to be willing. 8. Healing doesn't mean returning to who you were. It means becoming who you are because of what you've lived. When Ananda finished, the silence was full. Not heavy. Not sad. Just full. Full of breath. Of knowing, of soft, sacred peace. Later that day, Liana led the children in planting a new Bodhi sapling beside the riverbank. "We'll call it the listening tree," she said, "so no one ever forgets there's always a place where you can be heard." She handed the watering bowl to Tanu. He poured gently and smiled. "My father would like this," he whispered. Dev started teaching others how to walk in meditation. Step by step, he no longer needed distractions. He had learned to walk with his memories, not run from them. Kiran opened a tiny learning center by the edge of the village. "Not for achievement," he said, "but for awakening." He told the children, "You are not here to be the best. You are here to learn how to care." And Ananda, he did less, not out of laziness but clarity. He taught only when asked. He listened more. And one afternoon, as the sun set in golden silence, he sat beneath the Bodhi tree and whispered, This is what I was seeking all along. Not escape, but return." One evening, a traveler arrived tattered, tired, trembling. She had walked for days, lost her mother, lost her home, lost herself. She said, "I don't know where else to go." And Ananda simply replied, "Then you've come to the right place." He made her tea, let her rest, and pointed to the river, the tree, the stones. "You don't need to speak," he said, "but you are welcome to feel." She cried, not because she was weak, but because she had finally stopped pretending to be strong. And the village made space. They always did. Years passed. Some people left, some returned, some stayed and built lives. But the tree of the 8 winds stood always, covered in prayer cloths, painted with stories, surrounded by offerings of grief and hope and healing. One day, a child asked Ananda, "Will this place always be here?" He smiled and said, "As long as someone remembers that pain is not the enemy, but the teacher, yes." The child looked at the river, then at the sky, then whispered, "I'll remember." That night, Ananda wrote his final words in his journal. Pain will visit, worry will knock, but I will open the door with calm eyes. I will say, come in, sit. I have learned not to fear you, for you have shown me the depth of joy. You have taught me to live awake. You have reminded me, I am still here, and that is enough. And so, the story ends, not with answers, but with openings, not with escape, but with return, not with silence, but with stillness. This place, this village, this circle, this story may not exist on a map, but it lives in every heart that has learned to sit with pain, to bow to grief, to breathe through sorrow, and to rise, gently, again, because pain is inevitable, but worrying is always optional.